Picture this, it's 1943, and a German U-boat commander peers through his periscope at the Atlantic's dark waters. His radio operator has just intercepted what sounds like a gold mine, British convoy communications revealing their exact position, speed, and cargo. Torpedoes are loaded. The crew is ready. But when they arrive at the coordinates, there's nothing. No ships. No convoy. Just empty ocean stretching to the horizon. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't luck. This was one of the most brilliant deceptions of World War II, a phantom radio network that turned Hitler's submarine fleet into puppets dancing to Britain's tune. And the man behind it? An eccentric engineer who believed the best weapon wasn't steel or explosives, but carefully crafted lies transmitted through invisible airwaves. If you want to discover how a handful of engineers with modified radios defeated an entire submarine fleet, hit that subscribe button right now. We're diving deep into the secret war fought not with bullets, but with electromagnetic waves, and I promise, this story gets even more unbelievable. Let's go! Chapter 1, The Wolfpack Terror. The year was 1942, and the Atlantic Ocean had become a graveyard. German U-boats, organized into devastating wolf packs, were sinking Allied merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. Every week, dozens of vessels carrying food, fuel, weapons, and troops vanished beneath the waves. The statistics were terrifying. In November 1942 alone, 119 Allied ships went down, over 700,000 tons of shipping. At this rate, Britain would starve, and any hope of liberating Europe would sink to the ocean floor. The U-boat tactics were ruthless and effective. Commanded by Admiral Karl Donitz, these submarines didn't hunt alone. They coordinated using high-frequency radio communications, sharing information about convoy locations, speeds, and defenses. When one U-boat spotted a target, it would shadow the convoy while broadcasting its position. Other submarines would converge like sharks drawn to blood, attacking in overwhelming numbers under cover of darkness. The Allies were desperate. Sonar could detect submarines underwater, but U-boats spent most of their time on the surface where they were faster and could recharge batteries. Radar was helping, but the Germans were developing radar detectors that warned them when Allied aircraft approached. Escort ships were too few, and the ocean was too vast. Every convoy that left port was a gamble, and the odds were getting worse. In London, a small group of scientists and military strategists gathered in a smoke-filled room beneath the Admiralty building. They faced an impossible question: how do you fight an enemy you can't see? Who coordinates perfectly? Who strikes from darkness and vanishes before dawn? The answer, they realized, wouldn't come from building more ships or training more sailors. It would come from understanding the invisible battlefield, the electromagnetic spectrum itself. These scientists knew that U-boats relied absolutely on radio communication. Without it, wolf packs couldn't coordinate. Without coordination, they were just scattered submarines, far less deadly. But the Germans used sophisticated encryption, the famous Enigma codes that Allied codebreakers were only beginning to crack. Even when they intercepted U-boat messages, understanding them took time, and by then the convoy was already under attack. What they needed was something different. Not to intercept U-boat communications, but to manipulate them. Not to decode messages, but to inject false ones. Not to find submarines, but to make submarines find targets that didn't exist. They needed to turn the Germans' greatest strength, their radio coordination, into a fatal weakness. And that's exactly what they set out to do. The concept was called radio deception, and it would require technology that didn't yet exist, tactics that had never been tested, and a level of coordination between scientists, sailors, and intelligence officers that seemed almost impossible. But the alternative was losing the war. So they began to experiment, to innovate, and to prepare for one of the most audacious technological gambits in military history. Chapter 2: The Science of Ghosts. Radio waves are invisible rivers of energy flowing through the air. They bounce off the atmosphere, bend around obstacles, and can be detected hundreds of miles away. By 1943, the Allies had become masters of a technology called high-frequency direction finding, HF/DF, pronounced Huff-Duff by sailors. These devices could detect U-boat radio transmissions and calculate their direction, giving convoy escorts a fighting chance to hunt the hunters. But some Allied scientists saw potential beyond mere detection. They realized that if you understood exactly how radio waves propagated across the ocean, you could do more than listen, you could deceive. The key insight came from studying atmospheric conditions. Radio signals don't travel in straight lines. They're affected by temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, and the ionosphere, that electrically charged layer of the upper atmosphere that can reflect radio waves back to Earth. Dr. Robert Watson Watt, the brilliant physicist who had pioneered British radar, assembled a team to explore radio deception. They discovered something remarkable. By carefully controlling transmission power, frequency, and timing, they could make a radio signal appear to come from somewhere it wasn't. Better yet, they could create what they called ghost echoes, false signals that appeared on German direction-finding equipment as if they were real ships broadcasting from different locations. The physics was complex, but the principle was elegant. When a ship transmitted a radio signal, German U-boats could detect it and estimate the ship's location based on signal strength and direction. But if Allied operators transmitted multiple carefully calibrated signals from the same location at slightly different frequencies and power levels, those signals would propagate differently through the atmosphere. To German receivers, it would appear as if multiple ships were broadcasting from an entire spread of locations. The team set up experimental equipment on the Scottish coast, using mathematical models to predict exactly how radio waves would behave under different atmospheric conditions. They learned to read weather patterns not for wind and rain, but for electromagnetic propagation characteristics. A cold front moving through could change how signals bounced off the ionosphere. Humidity affected signal absorption. Time of day mattered. Radio waves traveled differently between the sun-heated ionosphere of midday and the cooler layers of night. They developed something called the Type 650 special transmitter, a device that could broadcast multiple overlapping signals with microsecond precision. It could mimic the radio signature of an entire convoy, merchant ships reporting position, escort vessels communicating with each other, even the characteristic electromagnetic noise of ship engines and generators. To listening U-boats, it would sound exactly like a fat, vulnerable target. But technology alone wasn't enough. The deception had to be perfect. German radio operators were experienced and suspicious. If the fake signals contained any anomalies, wrong frequencies, incorrect protocols, timing errors, the whole ruse would collapse. So the Allies studied captured German direction-finding equipment, interviewed U-boat prisoners about their radio procedures, and used decrypted Enigma messages to understand exactly what German submarines were listening for. By late 1943, they were ready. The ghost ship technology existed. The tactics were developed. All they needed now was the courage to test it in actual combat, where failure wouldn't mean embarrassment in a laboratory, it would mean sailors dying in burning ships, sinking into the cold Atlantic darkness. The first operational test was scheduled for January 1944, and everyone involved knew they were about to attempt something unprecedented in naval warfare. Chapter 3: Operation Phantom Fleet. The convoy designated SC-143 departed from Halifax, Nova Scotia on January 8, 1944. To German intelligence, it looked like any other Allied convoy, 37 merchant ships carrying aviation fuel, tanks, ammunition, and troops, protected by 6 escort vessels. U-Boat Command received the intelligence report and immediately began positioning submarines for an intercept. 8 U-boats were vectored toward the projected convoy route, a classic wolf pack ambush. But SC-143 was different in one crucial way. Hidden among the escort vessels was HMS Subtle, a specially modified destroyer carrying the Type 650 transmitter system and a team of radio deception specialists. Their mission was codenamed Operation Phantom Fleet, and it was the first live test of ghost ship technology in combat conditions. As the real convoy steamed eastward, HMS Subtle began broadcasting. The transmissions were carefully designed to simulate a second convoy traveling on a parallel course approximately 60 miles to the north. The Phantom convoy had its own radio chatter, position reports, weather updates, even simulated messages about a sick crewman needing medical attention. The signals were calibrated to suggest a larger, slower convoy than SC-143, a more attractive target. The operation required split-second timing and constant adjustment. Radio operators monitored atmospheric conditions and adjusted transmission parameters in real time. They had to maintain the deception 24 hours a day, creating a complete illusion of a convoy that didn't exist. Meanwhile, SC-143 maintained strict radio silence, becoming invisible while its ghost twin drew all the attention. The plan worked better than anyone hoped. German U-Boat Command intercepted the Phantom signals and assessed them as a priority target. 6 of the 8 submarines that had been positioned to attack SC-143 were redirected north toward the ghost convoy. The remaining 2 U-boats found themselves hunting a real convoy that had suddenly become much better protected. The odds had shifted dramatically in the Allies' favor. For 3 days, German submarines pursued the Phantom signals across the North Atlantic. HMS Subtle stayed with the real convoy while controlling the Ghost, carefully moving the Phantom signals in a pattern that suggested a slow, wallowing convoy struggling through heavy seas. U-boats surfaced to sprint ahead for intercept positions, exposing themselves to Allied aircraft. They burned precious fuel racing toward coordinates where nothing existed. On the night of January 11th, the Germans finally realized something was wrong. U-boats arriving at the Phantom convoy's projected position found empty ocean. Radio operators reported signal inconsistencies. U-Boat Command issued urgent messages demanding clarification, but by then the real convoy SC-143 was beyond effective intercept range, approaching the protective air cover of British-based aircraft. The result was stunning. SC-143 crossed the Atlantic without losing a single ship. Meanwhile, the submarine wolf pack wasted over a week of patrol time, thousands of gallons of fuel, and exposed themselves repeatedly to air attack. 2 U-boats were damaged by Allied aircraft while surfacing to chase the Phantom. Most importantly, German U-Boat Command began to doubt their intelligence and their radio detection capabilities. The invisible battlefield had claimed its first victims, and they never even knew what hit them. Chapter 4: The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. The success of Operation Phantom Fleet unleashed a revolution in naval warfare. Within weeks, multiple Allied ships were equipped with ghost transmitter systems. But the technology's real potential went far beyond simple decoys. Allied commanders realized they could use Phantom signals not just to misdirect U-boats, but to actively hunt them down. The strategy was diabolical in its elegance. Instead of broadcasting ghost convoys to draw submarines away from real targets, the Allies began broadcasting Phantom signals designed to draw U-boats into carefully prepared ambushes. They would create the electromagnetic signature of a damaged, struggling merchant ship, exactly the kind of easy target U-boat commanders couldn't resist. The Phantom would broadcast distress signals, position updates showing it falling behind its convoy, even fake radio chatter suggesting the ship had minimal defensive armament. German submarines would converge on these signals, following standard doctrine: surface at night, approach at high speed, attack with deck guns to save precious torpedoes. But when they arrived, instead of a crippled freighter they found Allied destroyer groups waiting in the darkness, radar locked on, depth charges ready. The British naval officer who pioneered these tactics was Commander Peter Gretton, a brilliant and aggressive anti-submarine warfare specialist. Gretton understood that ghost signals could do more than deceive. They could manipulate German behavior, forcing U-boats to make predictable tactical decisions that played directly into Allied strengths. In March 1944, Gretton's destroyer group executed what would become known as Operation Mousetrap. They positioned themselves in the mid-Atlantic and began broadcasting a phantom tanker, complete with distress signals indicating engine damage. The transmission suggested a vessel loaded with aviation fuel, an irresistible target, worth multiple ordinary merchant ships. Over 48 hours, 3 separate U-boats detected the signals and moved to intercept. The first submarine, U-523, surfaced 12 miles from the Phantom's transmitted position just after midnight. Gretton's destroyers detected it immediately on radar and closed at flank speed. U-523's commander realized his mistake only when searchlights blazed across the water and shells began exploding around his submarine. The U-boat crash-dived but couldn't escape. Depth charges crushed its hull 180 meters down. The second U-boat, U-448, approached more cautiously, but made the fatal error of transmitting a position report back to U-boat command. British HF/DF stations triangulated the transmission instantly. Allied aircraft from Iceland arrived within an hour. U-448 never knew the tanker was a phantom, it died still hunting the ghost. But it was the third submarine, U-731, that revealed just how sophisticated the deception had become. Its commander was experienced and suspicious. He detected the phantom tanker's signals but noticed subtle inconsistencies. Instead of attacking, he surfaced well away from the target and transmitted a warning to U-boat command: possible deception. Phantom signals suspected. Allied codebreakers decrypted that message within hours. They realized the Germans were beginning to understand the ghost ship technology. The psychological war was escalating. But instead of abandoning the tactic, Allied commanders decided to double down. They began mixing real targets with phantom ones, making it impossible for U-boats to know which signals to trust. Every convoy became a potential trap. Every distress call could be an ambush. German U-boat morale began to crack. Commanders reported haunted waters where ships appeared and vanished. Some claimed entire convoys simply disappeared from their instruments. Others refused to attack what their equipment told them were perfect targets, suspecting deception. The invisible battlefield had become psychological warfare, and the Germans were losing their nerve. By mid-1944, U-boat effectiveness had collapsed. Sinkings of Allied shipping dropped to their lowest levels since 1940. Meanwhile, German submarine losses soared. The hunters had become the hunted, and they were being stalked by enemies they couldn't see, fighting a war they didn't fully understand. Chapter 5: The Electromagnetic Battlefield. As ghost ship technology proliferated through the Allied fleet, an entirely new form of warfare emerged, one fought not with guns and torpedoes, but with invisible electromagnetic signals manipulated by scientists who understood the physics of deception. The Type 650 transmitters evolved into increasingly sophisticated systems, capable of simulating not just ships but entire naval operations. By summer 1944, Allied radio deception specialists could create phantom invasion fleets. They generated the electromagnetic signature of hundreds of vessels, landing craft, battleships, cruisers, support ships, all broadcasting coordinated radio traffic. These phantom armadas could be positioned anywhere, drawing German defensive resources away from real invasion points. The most ambitious use of this technology came during Operation Fortitude, the massive deception campaign designed to mislead Germans about the D-Day invasion location. While dummy tanks and fake army camps created physical deceptions, ghost transmitter ships created an entire phantom naval force apparently preparing to invade the Pas-de-Calais region of France, hundreds of miles from the real Normandy landing beaches. German intelligence intercepted massive volumes of radio traffic suggesting a huge fleet assembling in southeastern English ports. They detected signals from landing craft conducting practice runs, warships coordinating fire support plans, and supply vessels organizing logistics. Every transmission was fake, generated by a dozen specially equipped ships and dozens of land-based transmitters, all carefully coordinated to create a complete illusion. The Phantom Fleet was so convincing that even after D-Day began at Normandy, Hitler kept powerful German forces at Pas-de-Calais for weeks, convinced the real invasion was still coming there. The ghost ships had helped enable the largest amphibious invasion in history by making the Germans defend against an attack that existed only as radio waves propagating through the atmosphere. But the technology had unexpected consequences. As both sides developed increasingly sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities, the electromagnetic spectrum became genuinely confusing. Allied ships sometimes mistook their own phantom signals for real threats. German radar operators saw ghosts everywhere and occasionally missed real targets. The invisible battlefield had become chaotic, a maze of deception and counter-deception where reality and illusion blurred together. There were tragic mistakes. In July 1944, an Allied destroyer group hunting a reported U-boat spent 12 hours pursuing what turned out to be reflections of their own ghost transmissions bouncing off an unusual atmospheric formation. Meanwhile, a real German submarine they'd ignored as probably a Phantom torpedoed two merchant ships. The technology that had saved so many lives had created new forms of fog of war. The Germans fought back with their own electronic deceptions, though they never matched Allied sophistication. They developed Aphrodite devices, radio transmitters attached to floating buoys that simulated U-boat signals to confuse HF/DF stations. Some U-boats carried special transmitters that could broadcast fake position reports, making Allied trackers believe submarines were in places they weren't. But Germany faced an insurmountable disadvantage. They were fighting a defensive war, trying to protect their U-boats, while the Allies were on offense, using deception to hunt submarines down. Defensive deception has to work every single time. Offensive deception only needs to work occasionally to be effective. The mathematics of electromagnetic warfare favored the Allies. By late 1944, the Atlantic had become a new kind of battlefield, one where invisible signals were as important as visible ships, where scientists mattered as much as sailors, where understanding physics could be more valuable than courage. The ghost ships that had begun as a desperate experiment had transformed naval warfare forever, proving that in modern combat, controlling information could be more powerful than controlling the seas themselves. Chapter 6: Legacy of the Ghosts. The war in the Atlantic was won not on a single dramatic day, but gradually, through accumulated small victories that turned the tide. Ghost ship technology played a crucial but unsung role in that victory. By 1945, U-boat losses had become unsustainable while Allied shipping losses had dropped to negligible levels. The submarine wolf packs that once terrorized the Atlantic had been hunted to near extinction. When World War II ended, the ghost ship technology didn't disappear, it evolved. The principles of radio deception pioneered by Allied scientists became foundational to modern electronic warfare. Today's military forces use electromagnetic deception systems thousands of times more sophisticated than the Type 650 transmitters, but the core concepts remain identical: manipulate enemy sensors, create false targets, control the information space. Modern warships carry electronic warfare suites that can simulate entire phantom fleets, generate false radar returns, and create ghost aircraft formations. Fighter jets use electronic countermeasures that make them appear to be somewhere they aren't. Submarines employ acoustic deception to confuse enemy sonar with phantom contacts. The invisible battlefield pioneered in World War II has expanded to encompass every portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, from radio waves to infrared to radar. But perhaps the most significant legacy is conceptual. The ghost ship operations proved that information dominance could be more valuable than material superiority. The Allies didn't defeat U-boats primarily by building more ships or developing better weapons. They won by controlling what German commanders believed they knew. They turned the enemy's sensors into weapons against them, making German submarines hunt targets that didn't exist while real convoys slipped past undetected. This principle, that controlling an enemy's perception is more powerful than destroying their forces, has become central to modern military doctrine. From GPS spoofing to cyber warfare to deepfake technology, the descendants of those World War II ghost ships are everywhere. We live in an age where information itself is a battlefield, where the most dangerous weapons might be the ones that manipulate what we think we see rather than what physically exists. The scientists and sailors who developed ghost ship technology understood something profound: reality is less important than what people believe reality to be. Those German U-boat commanders who hunted phantom ships across the Atlantic weren't stupid or incompetent, they were rationally responding to information their instruments told them was real. They were defeated not by superior force but by superior understanding of how their instruments could be deceived. In many ways, we're all vulnerable to the same manipulations today. Our sensors, our smartphones, our computers, our media feeds, tell us things about the world, and we trust that information because we have no alternative. We navigate by instruments, just like those U-boat commanders. And just like them, we're vulnerable to anyone who understands those instruments better than we do and can manipulate what they tell us. The story of the ghost ships is ultimately a story about the power and danger of information technology. It's a reminder that in any conflict, military, economic, political, or social, controlling information can be more important than controlling physical space. The U-boats hunting ghost ships across the Atlantic in 1943 thought they were fighting a traditional war. They didn't realize until too late that they'd already lost a different war, one fought on an invisible battlefield they barely knew existed. Today, as we navigate our own invisible battlefields of electromagnetic signals, data streams, and digital information, it's worth remembering those German submarine commanders peering through periscopes at ships that weren't there. They teach us a crucial lesson: the most dangerous enemies are the ones you don't realize you're fighting, and the most effective weapons are the ones you can't see. The ghosts that haunted the Atlantic 80 years ago still haunt us today, we've just learned to call them by different names. Epilogue: The Man Who Saw Ghosts. Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Müller survived the war, though his submarine, U-192, did not. In the spring of 1944, his boat was one of dozens hunting Allied convoys in the North Atlantic, and Müller was considered one of the Kriegsmarine's most competent commanders, experienced, cautious, with 5 confirmed kills to his credit. But in April 1944, something happened that would haunt him for the rest of his life. U-192 detected a convoy approximately 90 nautical miles northwest of its position. The radio signals were clear: multiple merchant ships, minimal escort protection, carrying what appeared to be aviation fuel based on the urgent nature of their communications. It was exactly the kind of target U-boat command prioritized: high value, lightly defended, close enough to intercept. Mueller ordered his boat to surface and began a high-speed approach under cover of darkness. For 18 hours, U-192 pursued those signals. Mueller's radio operator provided constant updates. The convoy was slowing, apparently due to engine trouble in one of the vessels. They were perfectly positioned for an ambush. As dawn approached, Mueller submerged and continued on battery power, preserving the element of surprise. His crew was confident, already imagining the tonnage they'd add to their tally. But when U-192 reached the attack position, Mueller found nothing. Empty ocean stretched to the horizon. No ships, no debris, no smoke, nothing. The radio signals that had guided them through the night had vanished completely. Mueller ordered his radio operator to recheck frequencies, convinced there'd been a navigational error. But their position was precise, verified by celestial navigation and dead reckoning. They were exactly where they should be, and the convoy that should have been there simply wasn't. For 3 more days, Mueller searched the area, burning through diesel fuel his boat couldn't spare. He interrogated his officers repeatedly, checking calculations, reviewing every decision. Nothing made sense. The convoy couldn't have simply disappeared. Ships that size couldn't travel fast enough to escape detection. Yet they were gone, as if they'd never existed at all. The incident went into Mueller's official log as target lost due to unknown factors. But privately, Mueller began to suspect something more disturbing. He'd heard rumors from other U-boat commanders, stories of phantom ships, ghost convoys, targets that appeared and vanished. Some attributed it to magnetic anomalies or atmospheric phenomena. Others whispered about Allied superweapons, technologies that could bend light or make ships invisible. A few, broken by the stress of constant patrol, talked about the Atlantic itself being haunted, taking revenge for all the sailors who'd died in its waters. Mueller didn't believe in ghosts or superweapons, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed about submarine warfare. The ocean that had once felt like home now seemed treacherous and deceptive. Every signal could be fake. Every target could be a trap. The confidence that had made him an effective commander eroded into paranoia and doubt. In June 1944, U-192 was sunk by depth charges from a Canadian destroyer group. Mueller and 23 of his crew survived, pulled from the oil-slicked water and taken prisoner. For the next year, confined in a Canadian POW camp, Mueller had time to think about that phantom convoy and what it meant. He spoke with other captured U-boat officers and discovered their stories mirrored his own, targets that vanished, signals that made no sense, a growing feeling that they were fighting against something they didn't understand. After the war, Mueller returned to Germany and tried to rebuild his life. He became a merchant marine officer, ironically working on the same Atlantic routes he'd once hunted. But he never forgot April 1944 and that convoy that didn't exist. For years, he assumed it was simply Allied superiority, better intelligence, better tactics, better luck. It wasn't until 1963, when a British historian writing about naval warfare contacted him for an interview, that Mueller learned the truth. The historian, researching declassified documents, had discovered references to radio deception operations and phantom signal transmissions. He showed Mueller technical documents about Type 650 transmitters, operational reports from HMS Subtle and other ghost ship platforms, and detailed accounts of how Allied forces had systematically deceived U-boat wolf packs throughout 1944. The convoy Mueller had hunted for 18 hours had been nothing but carefully calibrated radio waves, transmitted from a ship hundreds of miles away, designed specifically to draw U-boats into wasted patrols. Mueller's reaction surprised the historian. Instead of anger or feeling humiliated, the former U-boat commander felt overwhelming relief. For 19 years, he told the historian, I thought I had gone mad that night. I've replayed those hours 1,000 times, questioning every decision, wondering what I missed. Now I know there was nothing to miss. The convoy wasn't there. It was never there. He paused, then added, in a strange way, it's comforting to know we lost to superior technology rather than superior courage. We were simply fighting the wrong war. That interview led Mueller to become an unlikely advocate for transparency about wartime technology. He gave lectures at naval academies, wrote articles for military journals, and even consulted with NATO forces developing modern electronic warfare systems. His message was consistent: technology is neither good nor evil, but soldiers deserve to know when the battlefield has fundamentally changed. We didn't lose the Atlantic because we were cowards or incompetents. We lost because our enemy understood something about the nature of information warfare that we didn't. In his later years, Mueller became particularly concerned about the implications of ghost ship technology for civilian life. He watched as electronic systems became embedded in every aspect of modern society: navigation, communication, commerce, entertainment. He saw how completely people trusted their instruments, just as he trusted the radio signals that night in 1944. And he worried about what would happen when those instruments were deliberately manipulated. The Atlantic taught me that reality and perception can be different things, he said in a 1978 interview, shortly before his death. When your instruments tell you something is there, you believe it's there. You have to believe it, you have no choice. But if someone who understands those instruments better than you can manipulate them, then they control your reality. They control what you believe you're seeing, what you think you're fighting, what you assume is true. He continued, we think of World War II as tanks and planes and ships, physical things destroying each other. But the real war, the one that determined the outcome, was fought with invisible signals, codes, deceptions. Information. That war has never ended. It just became more sophisticated, more pervasive, harder to detect. Every time you look at a screen and trust what it shows you, you're in the same position I was in April 1944, steering by instruments that might be telling you the truth or might be showing you ghosts. Mueller died in 1979, still fascinated by the technology that had defeated him. His personal papers, donated to a German naval museum, contain extensive notes on electronic warfare, information theory, and the philosophy of deception. There are sketches showing how ghost ship transmitters worked, technical diagrams he'd requested from former Allied officers, and pages of calculations attempting to estimate how many U-boats had been lost or rendered ineffective by phantom signals. But perhaps most poignant is a journal entry from 1974, written after Mueller had attended a NATO demonstration of modern electronic countermeasures, systems that could make fighter jets appear to be in multiple locations simultaneously, create phantom missile launches, or spoof enemy radar completely. I watched today as young officers demonstrated weapons systems that would have seemed like magic in 1944. They were excited, proud of their sophisticated tools. I wanted to warn them, these weapons cut both ways. Whatever you can do to your enemy can eventually do to you. The side that wins isn't the one with better technology, it's the one that better understands the limitations and vulnerabilities of technology itself. We never learn that lesson. I hope they do. The story of Heinrich Müller in U-192 represents thousands of similar stories, German submariners who never knew they were fighting against phantoms, who died or survived wondering what went wrong, who struggled to understand how the Atlantic had turned against them. They were caught in a transformation they couldn't perceive, the shift from industrial warfare, where victory came from building more ships and firing more torpedoes, to information warfare, where victory came from controlling what the enemy believed they knew. Today, Mueller's warnings seem prophetic. We live in an era where deep-fake videos can make people appear to say things they never said, where GPS spoofing can make ships and planes think they're somewhere they're not, where social media algorithms can shape what billions of people believe is true. The ghost ships of 1944 were crude prototypes of a form of warfare, and a form of manipulation, that has become omnipresent. The young German submarine commander who spent 18 hours hunting a convoy that didn't exist has become a symbol of a deeper truth. In any age of technology, the most vulnerable position is not knowing when you're being deceived. The instruments we rely on, whether radio direction finders in 1944 or smartphones in 2025, mediate our understanding of reality. And whoever controls those instruments, whoever understands them well enough to manipulate them, controls what we perceive as real. The ghosts that Heinrich Müller chased across the Atlantic 80 years ago were just radio signals, carefully crafted and strategically deployed. But they represented something more, the realization that reality itself had become a battlefield, and that the winners would be those who could make their enemies see things that weren't there while hiding things that were. That battlefield has only expanded since 1944, encompassing every frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum, every digital communication channel, every screen we look at and trust. Müller spent the last years of his life trying to teach a lesson he'd learned the hard way. Never trust your instruments more than your judgment, never assume that what you're seeing is real just because technology shows it to you, and never forget that someone, somewhere, might understand your tools better than you do. It's a lesson that seems more relevant with every passing year, as the boundary between reality and simulation, between truth and deception, becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish. The invisible radio trick that made Nazi submarines hunt ghost ships didn't end with World War II. It evolved, proliferated, and became the template for how information warfare works in the 21st century. Every time we're deceived by manipulated media, every time an algorithm shows us a reality shaped by invisible calculations, every time we trust what a screen tells us without questioning how that information was generated, we're experiencing a descendant of those phantom convoys that haunted the Atlantic. Heinrich Müller would recognize the world we live in. He'd see the ghosts everywhere, more sophisticated, more convincing, more dangerous, but fundamentally the same principle that sent him hunting through empty ocean that April night in 1944. He'd probably warn us, as he warned those NATO officers, that the most dangerous weapon isn't the one you can see coming. It's the one that convinces you that you're seeing something else entirely, fighting a battle that exists only in the carefully constructed illusion that someone else has created for you. And he'd remind us that the first step in winning that battle is simply recognizing that it's being fought at all.